Okay, so I'm hoping that today is a little bit more of a discussion for people that have questions about what emulation is and how we can, what it's actually good for. And any feedback is appreciated, and any questions you have, I'm more than happy to answer here. First of all, my background, I've been dealing with VMS since a variant of version 1, which I no longer recall, starting in 1979 at a university. And I actually was able to get college credit to actually work on 11780 and get it ready for student use a couple of semesters after we received it. And I've been dealing with VMS ever since. And I'm probably one of a few people that has actually been involved with VMS for my entire career. I've successfully avoided that four-letter word, also known as Unix, and its variants in my career. And I'm very proud to say that. So I've done everything on VMS for my entire career. I've primarily been a maintainer. I'm not a developer. I do not have a creative bone in my body. I'm a fixer. And that's what I do. And my entire involvement has been fixing issues. My involvement with emulation has been for 3.5 years. Before I started at Stromasys, I had never used an emulator before. And the one thing I can say about it is that in the emulated environment, to me, it's just like running on a piece of hardware, except it's faster. I have a fairly large collection of actual hardware in my own home, much to my wife's chagrin. But I have VAX, Alpha, and Itanium boxes, and I use them on a fairly regular basis as long as my wallet will allow, because they're not exactly friendly to power. Well, they're friendly to power companies and not necessarily to me. But I have done some comparison testing with emulators and with the real hardware. And interestingly enough, my laptop is faster running the emulator than my DS10 is sitting in my lab. So that's, other than that, no change. I actually took a copy of the disk off my DS10, put it into the emulated environment, booted it up, and it works. And it's wonderful. What is emulation? It is not translation. The emulator emulates not just the instruction set for the machine, it actually emulates the hardware itself. So it's a one-for-one, I almost call it an exchange. And what I to explain it to customers, basically it's a lift and shift. If you have a DS10 today and you want to emulate a DS10, as far as you're concerned, it'll say it's a DS10, it'll behave like a DS10. The performance, however, will be different. This becomes important when you're looking at the actual hardware, because we've run into situations where somebody says, well, I'm only running at 100 megabit for my Ethernet. Well, not really, because it was actually on a 25 gig backbone. VMS doesn't know what the 25 gig backbone is because it doesn't see it. Our emulator is emulating the 100 megabit hardware. So VMS will only ever see 100 megabit hardware. The underlying performance of that hardware, however, will be it won't be at the full 25 gig, but it'll be some subset of that. But it'll be a lot more than 100 meg for sure. Okay, but VMS will never see it because it's only looking at what it sees as its hardware. That's a concept that some people just don't seem to grasp, because when we even look at disk drives, for example, you will see a SCSI device. It could be sitting on SSD. It could be sitting on who knows what. All VMS will ever see is a same device that it used to be on an actual Alpha, for example. Same thing with the VAX. We will emulate an RMO5 if you want it to be. And if it'll say it's an RMO5, it's going to be sitting on an SSD somewhere, but VMS will see it as an RMO5. So that's the difference between what I would call a translation versus emulation. So we're not only emulating the instruction set, we're actually emulating the physical hardware that's being used here. And this is what makes it easy in most cases to do a move from the real hardware to an emulated environment. This is pretty much what I just described here. Tapes drives is another one. Stromasys allows you to give to have emulated tape drives. And what people can't seem to recall is that they will function and look exactly as tapes do today. Where this comes into play is when you put multiple backup save sets, for example, on a single tape drive. If you have a single tape drive and you want save set number 2, you have to read through the entirety of save set 1 in order to get to save set 2 to read the contents of save set 2. Works the same way in a virtual tape. So if you have an extremely large virtual tape and you want to get the last save set on the end, then you'll have to literally read through the entire tape, just like you would on a regular piece of hardware. One of the changes that we recommend, for example, to address this in the emulated environment is rather than using virtual tapes, to use a removable virtual disk, which allows you to put those save sets on the disk, but now you can access the save sets directly without having to read through the previous ones. That's more of an implementation nit than anything else, but it's something that we typically recommend. Both disk drives and tape drives can appear as files at the host level. Stromisys supports both Windows and Linux variants, so that the disk drives, for what VMS sees as disk drives, are actually files, or we can actually access raw devices on a SAN, for example. It's up to you. It's up to you, however you want to manage it. Most people use the file option only because it makes backups, of their environment a little bit easier, or making replication or whatever, because then you just copy the files from point A to point B instead of having to use VMS to do it. You can do it outside of VMS. Caveat to that, though, is anytime you touch these VDisk files in particular, they have to be done with the emulator shut down, or you risk corruption. The emulator has to have full control over that specific file at all times, because we internally cache some things, and if you touch it or modify it, some things may not complete properly, and there's potential for corruption there. Which is why I mentioned when we were talking about using this disk instead of a tape, we say you make it removable. If you dismount it from VMS's perspective, it no longer has a tie to the emulator. You can do whatever you want. Okay. Marketing made me put this piece in. I have to give you the history. So Stromisys has been around for a long time. I've been dealing with emulators for over 20 years. I've only been involved in the last 3, but the whole idea here is that there's a lot of history here. The focus has been to try to replicate or to emulate as close as possible the actual hardware, both in function and response. So from the perspective of a VMS user or even a system manager, you will never see the difference. If you ask it what kind of CPU it is, it'll tell you, and it'll be what you expect. There are some models that are not emulated. There will be similar ones, and it's rare for us to not be able to emulate a particular model. And the only caveat to that might have to do with the VMS licensing. And I'm not aware of a case where that ended up being a problem, because usually the similar model requires a similar license from the VMS perspective, and we have not run into any problems with that yet.
Well, some software is tied to the SID.
We have the ability to specify the system ID as well.
I have a product that does it too.
Yeah, and a lot of third-party products also tied software licenses to MAC addresses. And our software will allow you to specify a MAC address as well, so that we can avoid any of the licensing issues related to that. Because fundamentally, one of the main reasons that people use emulation is because of either failing hardware, suspected soon-to-be failing hardware, and a potential lack of replacement parts. As time goes on, replacement parts for various and sundry alpha models and VAX models even harder now, but are getting harder and harder to find. And you don't want to bet your business on a 20-year-old piece of hardware that might fail at some point. Typically, it's just power supplies and stuff. But be that as it may, you can't bet your business on something that may not last. So the alternative is to go to the emulated model if you can't upgrade. So I think this is what I was trying to say before too, is that literally it's a lift and shift. So as you can see, there are no changes to the legacy system at all. The MS version doesn't need to change. Nothing needs to change. Now, as I said, footprint reduction is another one. You take an Alpha system like a 2100 or a 4100, they're rather large boxes, or even a DS10. DS10 is I think it's 3 rack spaces or 3, I believe. You can go down to a single space x86 box that's going to be significantly more powerful, and you can emulate the DS10 and get better performance out of it for less footprint. And perhaps more importantly, if you're dealing with vdisk files that happen to be resident on a local disk, think back to the size of the disks that were available on the Alpha DS10 box versus the size of the disks that are available today, both physically and capacity-wise, and think what you can put in a single rack space server today with resident disks in that box as well to replace something like a DS10. You're orders of magnitude higher in disk capacity and probably similarly in performance. And I think one of the biggest things I've run into with clients that I've dealt with outside of Stromysys is even if spare parts are available, people have no idea how to replace them in a box. And some of the stories I've heard and some of the things I've come across personally have been interesting at best, at how long it takes to get something fixed. It should be trivial. Another reason for moving to emulation is software's not available for newer boxes or newer versions of VMS. And that's a big problem, particularly with some vendors that are no longer around. Client I'm dealing with right now has all their code written in PL1. The company that used to provide the PL1 product, I believe the owner passed away, and that's the end of it. It's not moving forward. It's unfortunate, but that's the nature of the beast. I believe Ada falls into that category, kind of, sort of, as well. I don't know. I think there's a company called Ada Core that I think has Canadian compiler, but I don't know how recent their versions are, what version the VMS runs on.
x86 uses Ada Core. So.
Oh, it does. So it's okay. So that's good. Because people were, I was hearing, I don't deal with Ada much, and people were saying that Ada was going to be a problem. But it's good to hear that it's not.
Yeah, I mean, natively generating is not developing an Ada component.
Okay. Okay. I'm aware of PL1 as a language. I don't know of anybody that uses Algo anymore. I haven't used it in 30 plus years, so I don't think anybody uses that anymore. I know COBOL's out there, Pascal, obviously basic.
Build this.
Build this. Yeah. Maybe I didn't say that right. I haven't used APL on VMS forever either. I avoided that like the plague anyways. I don't know of anybody that still uses that either. I don't know of any other languages that were on VMS that aren't at least on the roadmap, if not available today.
Macro?
Well, the macro compiler is still there, so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you lots of stories about macro. One of the ways we've been trying to move people forward, and I don't know if I'm supposed to do this, but I do it anyway. I try to get our customers to upgrade to the most recent BSI version where I can. Some can't because of all the limitations, but I would like to get them up to the most recent supported, and I'll be at whatever support level, at least at a supported level, as much as possible. A lot of these, from my experience, the Alpha, I've got clients using 6.2, interestingly enough. Not that many. Most are either at 7.1-2 or 7.2-1 as their terminal version, or they're at 7.3-2. We have some at 8.3, not 8.4, which I don't quite get, but they stopped at 8.3. And we've been trying to get them to go to the BSI 8.4 variants where we can. Usually the reason they can't is because of a third party that won't work because they don't have the proper license to work VMS, the VSI variant of VMS.
And I can add something to that if you want, but
Sure.
the 8384 binary compatible, so whatever we're cutting through, we're cutting for. However, it's a perpetual license. They go to VSI, it becomes a subscription.
No, I'm aware
That's
of that.
actually a big driver, but
Yeah.
VSI 2L2 is optimized within your emulator.
Yes.
It's way faster.
I am aware of that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should be an advertisement right there.
It should be, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have found, and this is not news to me, I've known this for years, but logic that has very little to do with business decisions, yes. But I mean, the nice thing about it is VMS is VMS is VMS. So anything they can do to move forward toward the right target, to me, is a good thing. Like I said, this is short, but the key here is that the emulators, and I'm not just talking about the Stromosys one either. VT Alpha, from what I understand, is similarly positioned and functions basically the same way and will provide you the same flexibility. The bottom line is that the emulator does provide this stepping stone because there's very little effort to make the move into the emulated environment. I think that's the point I'm trying to make here is, and success to me is going into a customer site and saying, okay, today we're going to make the move. And you shut down the real box. You bring up the new box and you tell the customers, okay, the system's back up. We did our maintenance. They get back on the machine and they can't tell the difference.
That's what's fast.
We'll get that on occasion. And what's actually surprising is I've had a couple of occasions where they didn't believe it. Because they said, you know, I usually have time to go get my cup of coffee and come back, and it was done too quick. And they said, well, this can't be right. It was too fast. I said, well, no, it's right. This customer of mine that I'm dealing with the PL1 code originally contacted me through a friend of mine because it was kind of interesting. He called me and said, do you know PL1? I said, well, I can spell it. And said, yeah, I'm familiar with it. He said, good, I have a customer who needs some help. I said, okay. They called me up. They explained to me this problem. I said, okay. They sent me a disk and I put it on the emulator because I didn't have the right hardware to run it on at the time. And we had a meeting to describe the problem. They gave me the instruction to show me how to see the problem. I said, okay, let me run it. He said, well, it's going to take about a half an hour. I said, it's done. I said, what? I said, okay, I see the problem. It's only been like 2 minutes. I said, yeah. And they were running on an older Alpha. I think it was an Alpha 400, and put it onto the emulator, and boom, it was done. That was a mixture of slower drives and the CPU, but bottom line is they just couldn't believe it was that quick. They are now on the cloud using the emulator on the cloud to do all the work. And things that used to take 3 or 4 hours are done in like 10 minutes now, and they're thrilled to death. And it was simply just a lift and shift. The particular problem was a timing problem having to do with they did a couple of things at their own operation out of order that their software just couldn't handle it. But that's another story for another day. But I've had a lot of success doing that, moving stuff from point A to point B and just running with it, and it's great. Another incident or case study. I was involved with the port of the medical information system by the company Cerner from VAX to Alpha. And this particular software replaced DCL with its application. So you did not log into VMS with DCL. You actually logged into the application. It handled all the image activation, the whole 9 yards. That was 9 months of my life of digital that I'll never get back to do this. Now realize this was during the port from VAX to Alpha. So not everything in the Alpha was 100% bug free at that point. So that made it interesting. Me and the image activator became real good. No, that's literally not the right way to say it.
Frenemies?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the proper phrase is, but I learned more about the image activator than I ever wanted to learn in my lifetime. But there are still a lot of customers today that are using that. Unfortunately, support was dropped from that a number of years ago, but because of regulatory reasons, these customers have to have access to this data. Now, at the time, most companies go from one system to another, you are given the opportunity to do what they call a data conversion from the old system to the new. Unfortunately, that usually costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So most places won't do it. They'll say, we'll keep the old system around for a long period of time. Thus, the problem. You now have a system that's 20 or 30 years old that's not going to run for very much longer because you can't get hard replacement parts starting to fail, et cetera. You've now moved it into the emulated environment. So we now have these systems that are set 30 years old, running in the emulated environment, lift and shift, copy the data, point A to point B, shut this one down, bring this one up. Everybody's fat, dumb, and happy. No certification involved because it's just a hardware change. You haven't changed the software at all. So you don't have to go through the validation process. They do it anyway to a degree, but in the medical field, to do the actual medical validation of software is a very extensive process. It's expensive, it's a pain, and honestly, I've done it. I will never want to do it again. So the fact that we can do lift and shift, because it's just a hardware change. This hardware failed, I'm using this hardware instead. Regulators are happy. They'll come in and say, what kind of machine is it? This says it's this. They see the real hardware. They said it's the same thing. We're good. That's where we're at. So this is the bottom line is this is the easiest way to get from point A to point B. It also gives you the opportunity to upgrade your software versions, which gets you to the BSI variant. If there's any changes that are needed for there, you can start. And one of the things we recommend as listed here is to use the clustering ability. So you can cluster with the new x86 box that will allow you to do and keep the same data between the boxes. So you have a lot of flexibility in moving forward. And I think this is one of the benefits of this is it gives you a lot more flexibility than you would have had otherwise. Question?
We know we can cluster integrity and x86.
Yep.
And we're doing it now, we're just playing around with it.
Okay.
But when you have an emulated
Yep.
machine, can you cluster that?
Yep.
And can you cluster it with real
Yes.
non-emulated?
I do it all the time.
Yeah, and you can even pass through the actual HBAs if you want to use the shared environment.
Yes.
Now, at some point, we will not be able to cluster with non-BSI versions.
Why would they do that?
Because urgent changes are needed to upgrade clustering software.
Right.
And BSI does not have permission from HPE to touch HPE versions.
Where did you get that from?
HPE, I work for BSI, I know what I'm talking
Yeah, no, I don't get that. Because I know that we try to do it with a vaccine, it doesn't work with the alphas. So you're saying like down the road, 9, some other version. Well, in other words, yes,
about. It will work
8.4.2L4 or something is not going to work with the alphas.
It'll work with Alpha 8,
Okay.
but it won't work with Alpha 8.3 or 7.4 or whatever.
Supported or literally won't function.
It certainly won't be supported in the clustering environment. It won't function.
Correct.
We need to make some changes way down in the bowels of the clustering software. And we
Right.
can't make any equivalent changes.
So,
Unless there's enough, enough pressure applied to HPE.
yeah, that's
They're
not
not
gonna
interested
happen.
in-
No.
Talking about.
No, so
That was
eight-
early version.
the VSI versions of 8.4 will work just fine. The HPE version of 8.4 will not. Correct. Yeah, no, I knew that was coming. I didn't know when, but it's coming, but I know it's coming, yeah.
Now, you can still cluster 9.3, 9.2, whatever, with old HPE versions. We're not taking them.
So will you be able to, well, you'll have to do an update to the alpha stream to support the new cluster requirements, right?
Yes.
Which means that at some point, even the alpha 842L2 will not cluster the newer versions of BSI software.
Or backwards.
If BSI made it,
Yeah,
they will. It will cluster with other BSI systems.
but you'll have to upgrade from 2L2 to a newer variant
I think.
to take into account the cluster
I have
changes.
to
probably.
guess, it will just be an update,
Yes,
opposed to a new version.
right, that's what I'm saying, but so at some point, even if you won't be able to use the 2L2 version as a bridge, is what I'm saying.
Right.
So at some point, you'll have to upgrade 2L2 to something newer in order to take advantage of the clustering. And 2L2 will still go with the old ones because that's going to remain the same. 2L2 will also fall into that category of not being able to move forward as well without an update.
But right now, we have customers that get it carrying,
Yep.
hooked up with all sorts of different boxes.
Well, you could modify this by MSCP surveying the data, which doesn't require clustering.
Correct. You didn't say you couldn't communicate with it, it said you can't cluster.
Right.
There is a difference.
Graceful.
Yeah, because I mean, I cluster VAX and Alpha, and for a while Titanium, it looks like just all played together.
It'll work just fine, exactly.
Right. But they changed,
You can do that with the emulated systems as well.
but if they change clustering,
Correct.
that goes away.
Actually, I know you've been that's been talked about for a long time.
The only thing that's broken so far, in reality, is the 9.x variants will not cluster with the really old, like, facts. 6.
But yeah, anything since, and yeah, anything before version 7 something.
And that's.
I know it's entirely unsupported. I have seen someone set up a core architecture cluster. So it did work.
Oh, there's a lot of things that work, yeah. I mean, I don't know if anybody was here for Norm's talk, but
Yeah.
I have personally been involved with a number of situations where things work by happenstance instead of on purpose.
But it sounds like after those changes, it's talking about made only 3 architecture.
That is correct. Yes, because they don't have any, well, first of all, yeah,
Unless you want to count carrying emulated as a 4th.
no, because we're tied to the whatever architecture or whatever software you're running. It's not an architecture issue, it's a software health issue. So if you run an emulated system with the right variant of VMS, it will cluster just fine.
Right, I was just saying only 3 would be possible because the
Yes,
vast is really
correct.
time.
Correct. Yeah, because they don't have anything for that. You are correct. Yeah. Yeah, the bottom line is that in my experience, limited as it has been with thousands of customers that I've had to deal with over the last 3.5 years, I have not heard of anything in the emulated environment that didn't work the same way it did in the real environment, except it was faster. Which can sometimes mean that problems that existed before, you'll find quicker now. As with anything, and this is probably more facts related than alpha, although I've seen it a couple times on alpha. There are still a number of systems out there, software systems I'm talking about now, that are probably not on purpose, but timing dependent, that the emulated system has kind of messed up a little bit.
If they timestamp.
Not necessarily timestamps, but things were coordinated more because of external throttles that don't exist necessarily.
Oh, I remember
IOs that happen too fast is a good example.
there was like a SQL database that you have to slow down the emulation and have it initialized, and you can start back, speed it back up again.
Yeah, there's latent timing bugs is really the only way to say it, that exist in software that are oftentimes found when the underlying platform changes.
Race conditions.
Yeah, that you don't realize are there, but are.
We found a number of day one vaccine that's small,
Yeah,
But
probably.
all of a sudden, we're running on so much faster platform, it's like,
Yeah. And, yeah. Perhaps one of the most common thing that I'm seeing now is SMP related crashes. CPU sanity crashes is a common one, and spin lock crashes, spin lock wait crashes. All because of the way the timing works with an SMP and how it fits in the emulated environment. Specifically, we require that hyperthreading be turned off. There's this misconception that hyperthreading gives you two CPUs, when in reality you only have one. It gives you the appearance of two CPUs when you only have one. However, you still only have one core that can provide X number of compute cycles. The idea behind hyperthreading is to not waste cycles and to use the ones that are there, either for stream A or stream B. However, due to the way that the operating system works, the way we emulate the actual hardware, each CPU thread will consume an entire core because there's always something for the hardware to execute. Even in idle loop, it may or may not be doing anything useful, but it's doing something that is executing instructions. So therefore, we'll consume an entire core. If you end up with hyperthreading turned on and two of the CPU cores end up, or CPU threads end up on the same physical core, you're now going to require 200% CPU time out of a single core, which can't happen. Depending upon how that actually gets divided, you may or may not have things timed right. That stuff that should happen on a fairly periodic basis doesn't. And another CPU says, oh, this didn't happen. It must be a hardware problem, which is how it's detected, and it crashes the system. That's your CPU sanity problem.
Well, another reason why I hate hyperthreading is you really have this huge problem with context switching between the two streams. So that slows things down.
That's at the hardware level. I'm not sure all the intricacies of that because I haven't bothered to check on it.
And cores are cheap.
But the bottom line is that you get these weird crashes showing up because it's not getting the time it needs. And there's ways to code around that, but that's a fundamental problem that shows up all the time. And it doesn't necessarily show up with alarming regularity. It'll show up at the least expected time, of course, if you don't want it to, but that's probably one of the most common failures that I see. And it's strictly an environmental thing. Things aren't set up right. Other than, like I said, things happening too fast and you just isn't expecting. And that's usually customer software that says, oh, I'm not expecting this quick. That gets more of a problem when you go from spinning Rust to SSD, of course. But fundamentally everything, but.
spinning Rust.
Oh, you haven't heard that before?
No.
Oh, yeah. That's really what it is. I think it's iron oxide, so yeah. Iron oxide on aluminum plates, for a finger. Yeah, I've got an RMO 5 disk. I'm looking for somebody that has a drive. I can try to get the data off it someday if anybody can tell
That's,
me.
you may have.
Yeah.
The VAX variant. Yeah.
And the farthest back I go is 9-track. I got two of those drives.
I got rid of those, but so yeah, any questions about the emulated environment or anything related there too? It turns out to be a lot simpler than most people realize, I think.
So you're expecting to have an x86 node.
Yep.
And an emulated alpha or whatever.
Yep.
And cluster them together.
And with real hardware.
Oh, yeah, but you don't want real hardware.
Well, no, but I mean, I actually have real hardware in my lab that I use as a confirmation. I've got a bunch of DS10s, a bunch of DS10Ls. I've got an Alpha 2100, which I don't run unless I absolutely have to. That sucks power like nobody's business. And I have a VAX 3800 that I still running 5.5. a bunch of titaniums too. Blade system as well as RX 1620s and 2440s.
You know, at some point, x86 is gonna be qualified for VMware, if it's not already.
Yep.
Could you run the emulated whatever on the same box using VMware
Yep.
as 9.1?
We'll run under, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's one box then.
So, you know, right now,
That's what
Huh?
we have that running today.
Okay,
so I mean, it's not beyond the bounds to have, I plan on setting this up relatively soon. I've got the VAX that I'll have running, at least one alpha, if not two, titanium. I plan on having x86 box on as well. I'm going to try to cluster them. I've got a 3-part system I can use for the SAN. I'm planning on trying to get that all set up and see if I can run a cluster all using the SAN. And that'll be an interesting thing. I should be able to. I shouldn't have any trouble doing it. It'll be interesting to see.
Well,
So you
the
apply
x86, you can't hit that storage directly unless you get the 923 field kit and the 16 gig. But you can do MSCP or
Yeah.
just have local storage.
Yeah, I'll
Sure.
figure it out. But I'll get it in the cluster first. At some point, I'll try to get it.
It works.
But yeah, it'll be fun to try. The largest one I've ever had going in my lab, and I did take a look at the election meeting, what it was doing, and I was particularly happy. It's spinning pretty good. Is I had 12 DS10s running at one time, with a blade, and four titanium boxes of the blade, all running at the same time, feeding up on one SAN with an IO test. That was fun. Just trying to gather data. I didn't run it too long. It was generating an awful lot of heat. I just had this thing sitting in my basement, so I did.
Rather than January.
Yeah.
We have some customers running some pretty big units. So
Yeah.
GS12 AEs.
So yeah, it all ran just fine. I mean, it's, I've got a couple of servers now that I'm trying to build up. I'm going to try to run a couple of GS80s on the server, a couple of servers. Play some games with some and stuff, but it's all fun. Keeps me out of, not really. Gets me in trouble when it keeps me out of it, but
TMI.
yeah. But, no, I mean, the thing I can say though is, and perhaps the I don't want to say surprising thing, but the most enjoyable thing for me, just having not done emulation prior to 3 years ago when I got hired at Scromosis, was how easy it is. And the fact that it just works. And I think I can say that for VMS, for pretty much most of my career, VMS has always been VMS, it's always been VMS. I still using the same login command file today on some of my systems that I used when I started in 1979 at university. It's still there.
You mean don't keep updating it? I just added some stuff to my
But-
login, just
you know,
a couple of weeks ago.
The bottom line is things just don't change. VMS is still VMS. It's easy and it's nice. And a lot of my time these days is spent just educating people. I think it's unfortunate we didn't get more younger folks here. I mean, a couple here and there. But they're most of us are
Fortunate.
most of us are retirement age or beyond. And you know, again, I think we need to get the next generation stuff. People can't believe, they say, well, it's hard to use. I said, how is it hard to use? You understand the English language? You know,
No. Hey, in my defense, I've been using VMS for over 20 years. I got my first alpha when I was in high school.
There you go.
that just makes me feel older, but that's, you know, to me, it's at this stage of the game, it's fun. I've been doing this long enough that to me, it's just enjoyable. I like solving problems and I like fixing stuff. And my focus now is more on performance. And I think one of the things I didn't mention, I should have, a lot of the existing real hardware had limitations that the emulator eliminates. For example, I've been talking about the DS10. DS10 model of Alpha had a maximum memory of 2 gigabytes. Okay, in the emulated environment, at least with our product, can go up to 32. And there's no cost to using 32 versus 2 from the emulator's perspective. And it's amazing how much better performance you can get if you have a little more memory. Not that a lot of applications use that much anyway, but that's one of the advantages, I think, is it gets away from some of the actual hardware limitations. A lot of the hardware has limitations, how many disk drives you can have, what the capacity is. Clearly, that's no longer an issue, so it gives you more flexibility there too. That might be one of the biggest advantages going to emulation for you, the x86 also. It gives you an opportunity to see what your application does in terms of having more resources available and whether you need to make changes, put some additional load on it, see how it's going to behave before you make the changes you have to make to get to the next level. So there's a lot of opportunities here to learn more about your own environment before you move to the next, which I think is an advantage too. Any other questions, comments, criticisms, payments?
I got a question.
Here we go. Yes, sir. Derek, what can we do for you today?
Well, just a comment, I guess. It seems that, at least with the Stromsys emulator, you know, when you, particularly with removable drives, you have files that are, you know, that are files 11 or file, you know, VMS format files. Then when you remove the disk, or, you know, within VMS, it is a container file on the Windows side.
Yep.
But then you're trying to mix the file formats, or trying to edit the file, or trying to set up a command procedure to handle what you're doing within VMS. You can affect it when you're now on the Windows side. You have a container file, and if you can, you know, I got save sets inside of this container. I dismount the removable drive. Now I've got a vdisk, you know, a .vdisk container file. Now I want to rename that file, or I want to.
You want to rename what file?
This container file, which is, you know, save sets.vdisk.
Okay.
Okay, but I want to do it, you know, I have to do it in DOS, or I have to do it in,
You can rename the file. Yeah.
right, but I need to script it. And I'm
Well, that's not a VMS issue. That's not an emulator issue. That's a Windows issue.
right, but I'm a VMS guy. I got to deal with this Windows.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with the emulator.
Okay.
That doesn't. If you don't care, you can name it whatever you want. So
Right.
they see.
I was gonna say that's the perfect use case for what they provide virtual tape drives.
Well,
So when you mount them, just and then actually read.
Well, no, you can have the same problem with a tape, because
Yeah.
what Windows names the tape file is you define. But if you want to change the name of that thing, you have to do it at the Windows level. You're not going to do it.
Emulator
Well,
does that
well,
for you.
I thought the emulator had a way to change it with the alpha, had a way to change the file name if you were gonna create a new tape file.
There's a utility to do that, yes.
Yeah.
And it escapes me at the name of that utility here, but yes. I've never used it, but yes, there is one that does that. You'd have to
You
look
want
up-
to end here with the VMS, you can mount the host inside VMS over SMB, and then use scripts inside of
No.
VMS. for VMS.
No, because VMS does not see the Windows name of that file at all. Doesn't know it, doesn't care what it is.
that's right. It's disengaged.
Yes, and you have to define the link between that file and the VMS device within the script that defines the configuration of the emulator.
I was talking about using Samba to access it, so Windows file should access those.
Yeah, but now you have to install Samba, big engine, just to do something pretty relatively
But
simple.
again, you're doing that outside the
Yeah,
scope of the
that's right.
emulator or VMS.
Right. And ironically, what's his name, dealt with this back in 2009. Herb, some old time guys dealt with this about 10, 12 years ago.
That's long before me. Ooh, I don't
And-
get to say that very often.
And I don't know what happened at Stromsys. They had a guy that was doing development of these DOS to VMS utilities, where you can, you know, if, you know, for instance, if the emulator licenses is counting down, you want to see that on your VMS side. I want to get alerts from the
Then put in your VMS mail address. sends out an email. So if you want us to learn it on VMS, that's.
It used to.
VMS,
But the utilities doesn't work.
then put in the case, fix it, doesn't work.
You
Okay.
carrying the associates for doing that?
Yes.
Yeah. The Karen utility will
We've got
send,
hundreds of these installations. We use that every day.
it'll send emails if it gets
To
to
Every
it.
day.
It'll
To
get,
Linux,
Yes, it really does.
talk to me.
What do customers do with these tape files? Do they ship them off to Iron Mountain?
interestingly enough, this topic has come up yesterday and today about how do you do backups, and everybody does backups to either tapes or disks, never sees what the actual thing worked by reading it back.
Yeah.
So you know how they take and write stuff to tapes? Actually, it was yesterday's
First study.
Vic's one, he said, you know, they kept writing to the same tape. Well, they do that in the emulator environment too. They write to the same file. And generally speaking, they'll do a Windows or a Linux backup of that file to somewhere, but never see if it's actually there.
Yeah.
So I've had places that make these massive files that are huge, you know, gigabytes in size, sometimes even larger, and they just leave it.
You take the file, that container, then you put it in Cohesity or in Commvault. Now you have a vault which has a file which has safe sets.
Yeah.
You mount it back into the emulator using a removable drive, and now you got your disk back with the safe sets on. But you better test it.
You want to do that as tapes, not as disks.
You can do either one, but
Disk is better because, as Dan mentioned, you got to read the whole tape to get to the end.
but either
if
way,
you
you
have-
can back it up using your standard
Right.
host backup utility and restore it the same way.
And then what do you do for offsite? You just ship it over the network to?
Yeah.
Again, however the host system does it, yeah. So that becomes an issue because now you're talking about doing a VMS backup to something, and that something gets backed up normally the way the entire VM would normally get backed up. So the key here is the potential corruption comes in when both Sharon and the host try to access the same file at the same time, which is why we flag it as removable. So if you do the removable disk, once it's dismounted from VMS, there's no ties from Sharon to it at all. You can back it up just like any other file on that system. That's what's recommended. So, and then when you bring it back, again, because there's a tie between the file name and a VMS device that's defined in the configuration file for the emulated instance, as long as that name stays the same, it's there. Now, in the case of tapes, if you go to write a tape, if the file doesn't exist, it'll create it.
Yeah.
But for tape, it has to be. I'm sorry?
Should be signed.
Shows up the tape file every time you make.
It's not gonna do anything different than VMS backup does.
But it could tell if it got corrupted.
Yes, because when you reconnect it, you remount the tape. If it got corrupted, it'll be just like a tape went bad. You get the same CRC errors, et cetera, yes.
We mainly use NFS. Push it out there.
Yeah, a lot of people do that too,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's easier getting started.
But some people prefer to keep their backup procedures the same, so they'll be mounting and dismounting tapes all the time. That's fine.
Mounting tapes.
It's actually kind of interesting. I
Well-
worked with one system where we had virtual tapes.
Yep.
That were backed up from disk to disk. And then that disk array we backed up to tape.
Yeah, but you say mount and dismount, right? So you'll appreciate this. Way back in the day when I was working for DEC, I was working in the BOS performance group, and we would get pre-release hardware for testing. So the first solid state disk that Digital had, we actually tested it in our lab. And it came in as a breadboard on top of the machine, and it had a front panel for an RA81 to turn it on and off.
Yeah.
So, okay, we get this thing ready to test, push the on button, and we had to wait for 20 seconds for the disk to spin up. So it literally took 20 seconds for the online light to come on because it had to spin up. Guys, seriously. So yes, but actually that disk actually performed extremely well, but yes. I will never forget that as long as I live, having to wait for an SSD to spin up. So, there's all kinds of stories.
Well, it's,
I should probably save that for tonight, right?
I just see a validation. But sometimes the hardware comes up too fast and other people won't be able to measure.
Yeah, I mean, this was just literally a breadboarded thing.
Yeah.
I don't think the real device had that problem, but it was just the interface that they were using at the time was rather amusing. But yeah, I could tell you 100 stories like that, of all the stuff I've been across over the years. Probably one of the few people that's worked on every model of VAX that was ever created, plus one. There's one that never made it out the door, that we got to test. It was kind of amazing.
what was that?
86,
8440.
8440.
It was a 4 CPU 8400 that never made it out the door because it actually performed worse than a single CPU 8400. The BI bus, which was the main CPU bus in the back, was just flooded with interprocessor communication. It just didn't.
Well, they were trying to do a bunch of stuff in software that they used to.
No, this was all, nope, it was just the CPU coordination overloaded the BI bus, so it couldn't actually get used for work.
Oh, but interesting.
Well, I got
Probably the 8600s.
8600s were pretty good, actually.
I don't know.
Yeah.
80.
Oh,
Oh,
that was probably the first variant of the, they replaced the packed decimal instructions with, software.
yeah,
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that they had.
Is that no, that wasn't the 8600 though. It was the 80, is it the 8500, 8700? I forget which one now, but yeah, one of them, they replaced it from a hardware instruction to
Yeah.
software or microcode one.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?